Hello, everybody, and welcome to week 3, or I guess week 4 of Stat Chasing. Well, we're going to be discussing all the exciting developments from weeks 1 to 3, hitting on each of the positions and the most important stats to get you up to speed as we look towards DFS, Best Ball Resurrection, and your seasonal leagues for the rest of the year. So, excited to go through the stats today. Drico, how was your week 3 for fantasy?
So I had a kind of great but kind of frustrating week 3. So as you know, I've been doing the kind of battle royale stuff on Underdog, and I had like this sick team. I'd like Lamar Jackson, I'd Mark Andrews, I'd Devonta Smith, and this was in one of the kind of smaller tournaments, the goal line stand, and it's 12 teams a draft. So that in itself pushed me up to 17th, but my if I had drafted Cordarrelle Patterson instead of Aaron Jones, I would have won the tournament, and I'm like kicking myself for that decision.
Yeah, that was probably one of those things where the ADP discrepancy was quite big. But as you mentioned in those tournaments, you should be pretty aggressive about reaching on ADP, right? Just from an ownership perspective. I would guess that.
In the battle royale stuff, when you're playing against 60,000 people, and it's 6 people in each draft, what you see happen is it's the same players drafted in the 5th and 6th round over and over and over again. And a good example of that last week would have been Mike Thomas is like drafted 100% of drafts, and then Chris Olave basically untouched despite the 330 air yards last week. And week 3, he obviously converted those air yards for a big score. So it's that sort of like discrepancy that you're looking for to kind of like target and leverage.
Yeah, that makes sense. And, I'm way less experienced in these than you are, but I've noticed when I'm on the clock in those drafts, it's so hard to go away from the ADP. Like that's just the lizard brain instinct, and also your best ball instinct to just look at the top 10 names and make a choice from there. But I think there really is a huge edge in these contests because of that. I think everyone's like approaching them so similarly. And yeah, like you've mentioned, you've done a lot of work on this. There's probably a ton of value in just sort of, for a weekly contest,
right.
ADP should not be treated as, as the Bible, as it might be in a season-long contest. So that's interesting.
And then cool. Devonta Smith was like almost completely undrafted as well.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. Like guys with that type of ceiling that are going undrafted, it's just it doesn't make any sense. But I can see, again, like from being on the clock in those as someone who's new and unexperienced with them, I see how that happens. Like you see the top 10 names, you're like, oh shit, like I should be picking AJ Brown over Devonta Smith 100% of the time, but you shouldn't, obviously.
I mean, people are drafting Mike Thomas over Devonta Smith because they're like, oh yeah, he got the targets. It's Michael Thomas, but it doesn't quite work like that in reality.
Yeah, for sure. Well, don't need to talk about my week 3 too much. I played a few DFS lineups and played all Mahomes stacks with Juju and McCole Hardman. So let's we can move past that. There's no exciting sweat there at all.
So after telling the people we need to stay away from these Chiefs receivers last week, where you're just trying to push the ownership down so you can jam them in.
Exactly, and I know we're massive following. I know hundreds of thousands of people. So I was trying to play the market there, but yeah, I don't know. I thought McCole was popping a little bit in the weighted targets per route run stuff, and the rest of the Chiefs wide receivers weren't. I thought he looked pretty good in week 2. It was, I don't know. It didn't work out.
No, obviously, I'm completely kidding. The prices in DFS and the Resurrection, what we were talking about, completely different game. And I think that's one of those things where, like, hey, the fundamental analysis is important, but relative to the price is super important too.
Yeah, it's just crazy. I mean, it's crazy how cheap you can get a Mahomes stack, even though he's really expensive. If you don't go with Kelsey, right? So I think that's going to work eventually, but man, good luck picking between MVS Juju, McCole, maybe Sky, even Justin Watson. We've seen break off a huge play. So they're playing Fortson and Noah Gray too. They're just rotating so many guys that maybe at a certain point it's sort of chasing fool's gold to try to hit on one of those guys. But when they're so cheap, you would think it's gonna work one of these times this year. But
I mean, that's one of the best ways to win in DFS is when you have this offense that you think has the potential to score lots of points, and all the people who can score those points are really cheap and low owned because people aren't sure which ones it's going to be. Well, it's got to be somebody. Obviously, it wasn't anybody last week, but that's a big situation that you do want to target.
Mm-hmm. I agree. The process. And speaking of the process, let's dive into our quarterback process for weeks 1 to 3. So looking at this chart here, same as we've had the last couple weeks, we're trying to assess quarterback performance with TD rate. So, percentage of throws where they get a TD on the y-axis. There's a lot of sort of noise in that data. And then adjusted yards per attempt on the x-axis, which is yards per attempt adjusted for touchdowns and interceptions. So it'll sort of, if you have a lot of interceptions, that'll draw that number to the left. If you have a lot of touchdowns, that'll bring that number to the right. So, and again, sorry, last thing to mention here, is rushing yards per game also shown. So you'll see obviously the insane rushing quarterbacks like Lamar, Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen pop out here. Drico, this looks like a mess. Obviously, we have Jalen Hurts, Lamar, Josh Allen, Mahomes, and even Tua separating in quite a ridiculous manner. And then there's just a massive cluster of quarterbacks besides that. Did you have any takeaways here? Looking at this.
Yeah. So, I do think it's interesting that Jalen Hurts is so high on the yards per attempt metric, and then relative to that, underperforming on the touchdown percentage. So it's crazy to think that he could be even more efficient. And then you see things like, well, the last 2 games, the Eagles have scored 28 points in like the first half, and then basically nothing in the second half. I guess going out to such a big lead probably does that. It is something that's kind of pushing that touchdown rate down. But it is crazy to think that he could be even more productive. But I did have a note.
Yeah.
And we were talking about this just before the show, that with the quarterbacks in the resurrection, the top guys are so expensive. You've got Josh Allen in the first round, Lamar Jackson at pick 15, Jalen Hurts at pick 20, Mahomes at pick 24. So, I mean, a big part of my best ball strategy this year was actually targeting those guys, but in the 5th and 6th round. And I really think that the kind of elite quarterback strategy, I get why those guys are going so high when you see this chart, but it's just so hard to win when you're using 1st and 2nd round picks on quarterback.
Yes, I agree with you. And I think if they were going in like the late 3rd or 4th, I think that would be more justifiable. And I would probably still take both of them. Certainly in the 4th, late 3rd, maybe it's a bit more of a question. But the way these guys are separating, I mean, Jalen Hurts looks like a completely different quarterback than he did the last 2 years. The way he's throwing the ball is just bounds above what we've seen from him in the past. Look, he's always had that insane rushing ability too, but this past week he didn't even really rush at all and still put up, like you said, 30 fantasy points in the first half. If they were pushed at all in that game, it truly could have been, a ridiculous all-time fantasy performance from Hurts, but they just didn't have to do anything besides hand it to Miles Sanders for the whole second half. So go ahead.
I do think it's interesting. So if you look at Hurts' his completion over expected last year, he threw deep a lot. So his actual completion rate was low enough, but his CPOE, so completion over expected, was actually neutral. So he was completing passes at about the rate you would expect for his average depth of target. I think a big thing that killed him last year was that he had Jalen Reagor, that he was taking a bunch of targets, and then now you substitute that for AJ Brown, and you can see that's such a huge difference.
Yeah, for sure. I think that the AJ Brown upgrade is one thing. I think another thing, and this is more narrative with Hurts, but he truly has just gotten so much better in every year of his career, going back to college through now. We've seen him be an extremely one-dimensional running quarterback at Alabama. They got benched for Tua, and people really thought he had no chance of being an NFL quarterback back when he was at Alabama, and proved people wrong at Oklahoma. Got drafted in the second round. Proved a lot of Eagles fans wrong, the past couple of years. So I just like betting on Jalen Hurts based on his growth trajectory, and obviously the weapons make a huge difference.
Right.
As well.
It makes it painful. It's painful to fade Jalen Hurts even in the second round, given just how good he is. But I mean, then you ask yourself the question: okay, so are you taking Hurts over Jalen Waddle or Javonte or Pittman or T. Higgins?
No, probably no. I mean, maybe Pittman. That's the only name there where I'm like, the quarterback upside for Hurts perhaps is worth it. It's tough, Drico, because I think it really depends. If all the elite quarterbacks are going early, I don't want to completely fade the elite quarterbacks. Like at some point, I want to just adjust to where the market has them ranked. But looking at the ADP, if like for the next couple of weeks while this is the landscape, I'm going to be taking stabs at the pocket passers going a bit later, who will not have the same consistent upside as the Hurts and Lamars, but we know can still pop off for massive games. That would be guys for me like Joe Burrow, 61. That's still quite rich, but Joe Burrow at 61. Tom Brady at 86 looks really good to me. I think Brady at this point in his career, he doesn't look bad. I think like I've heard some film takes on him that he looks like the same quarterback, and I largely agree with that. It's just that his weapons are so bad right now, and you're getting him at a pretty massive discount compared to some of these other quarterbacks. And I think eventually Evans, Godwin, Julio will come back healthy, and he can really compete with the ceiling of some of those, Lamar, Hurts guys on a given week. So I think that's how I'm playing it right now, is looking at sort of the pocket passers going.
So speaking of pocket passers at a discount, the one name that I've kind of circled is Trevor Lawrence. Right now going at pick 110, and that's obviously not going to hold. And I'd say even if entered a draft tonight, I doubt he lasts to 110. But I think one of the, so I listen to Sean Siegel a lot. I know you do, and a lot of people who are listening do. And one of his big themes are that people are very often underreacting to news and information. And then the information we're getting on Trevor Lawrence is that Urban Meyer screwed him over, and he is actually this generational quarterback prospect, and we should be reacting to that. And like at a 90 pick difference to Jalen Hurts, or even if it's 60 picks, like I think that's definitely among quarterbacks, but possibly in the entire draft, probably the bargain of the draft right now.
Lawrence is looking awesome. I'm totally on board with that. And I think if we change our mindset a little bit and say that last year never happened, Trevor Lawrence is a rookie this year, Doug Peterson is his head coach, and he comes off to this hot of a start, his ADP would skyrocket. But we're still anchored to how bad that Urban Meyer year was. So I'm with you there. The market's not reacting fast enough. I think this is an interesting question from Mike Robb in the chat. So based off performance for player and team, which of these rookie quarterbacks have the best chance to be the hammer for the resurrection? And so how I interpret this is, look, there's none of these rookie quarterbacks are on this chart, unless I'm missing something, because none of them have started yet. For the rookie quarterbacks, I'm thinking Kenny Pickett, Malik Willis, Desmond Ridder, I think those are probably the only three. Maybe you could throw Sam Howell in there. Let's say we limit our discussion to those four. I think so. How I interpret this question is which starting quarterback that's ahead of those rookies is doing the worst right now, and which of these teams actually have good enough weapons to potentially elevate one of those rookie quarterbacks. And I think to me the clear answer is Mitch Trubisky with Kenny Pickett coming in there. It's tough. I think you could argue Willis for this, but let me make the case for Pickett. I think Pittsburgh has a really exciting set of weapons. Deontay Johnson is a proven target earner, a stud. Claypool is a big slot wide receiver, yak weapon. They also have Najee, Freiermuth, Pickens, like a good set of complementary guys that can do some work in the passing game. And Trubisky has just been so far and away worse than Mariota, who's ahead of Ritter, Tannehill, who's ahead of Willis, that I think Pickett is by far the most likely out of those group to get starts.
He has a first round draft capital.
Yeah.
The Steelers absolutely stink. Like they're probably gonna lose a bunch of games. And then that really does push the pressure. That's like, oh, let's see what we have in a rookie quarterback.
I think they have to. And Pickett, I think, does have a little bit more mobility than he's given credit for. He has that famous fake slide, 60-yard run that they changed the rule after him in college football because of that. But he's got some rushing juice, probably more in like projects more of like a Tannehill level rusher, obviously, than like a Hurts or Lamar level rusher. But I think he could give you some rushing upside. So if I'm taking a swing on a rookie quarterback, I'm probably going Pickett, but I don't think Willis or even Ritter are terrible, like 18th round picks if you have stacks with those guys and want to take a stab in the best way.
I really like Sam Howell as well, because there's another team where they're 1-2. Carson Wentz is, I mean, he's just made all these. He hasn't made the really terrible put it on Twitter mistakes yet, but it does feel like only a matter of time. And they're not a bad set of weapons to throw to.
No, good wide receivers, yeah.
And Sam Howell was so good in college. Like he was a big arm, like he was so productive, efficient throughout his college career. And then in his senior year, when all of his weapons graduated from college, he turned into this dual threat quarterback and had pretty good rushing yards. So that one feels like one where it's probably a little bit thinner for him to start just because he went so late. But I could still kind of see it happen. And I think if it did happen, the potential is just so high.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not going to hate on any of those guys, Howell, Ritter, Willis, just because they'll be drafted so infrequently that the upside, if they hit, is quite high. I've generally just been fading the idea, like stepping out of Best Ball Resurrection. I think it's a good pick in that. I've been generally fading the idea that those guys have a decent chance to start games. It's so rare for non-first round pick quarterback. I think we get excited about these guys in Dynasty and stuff, but it really is rare for these guys to get starting opportunities. That said, like the percent chance of them actually getting the starting opportunity relative to how the field is going to treat them is still good. So I'm on board with that. Maybe just a slight sort of nitpick there.
Yeah, it's probably not going to be a core strategy, but the fact that there's some basically bad quarterbacks, and the landscape, the ADP landscape for quarterbacks is so tough that this is probably one of the better years to bet on a last round rookie breaking in to start.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep, I'm with you there. Great. Let's move on to running back, Drico. Looking at this chart here. So familiar, you guys should be familiar if you've watched in the past to this chart. We're looking at running back expected fantasy points and efficiency here. So on the y-axis, we have a receiving expected fantasy points per game. And then the x-axis have rushing expected fantasy points per game. So those taken together give you an idea of the total expected fantasy points for all of the running backs. And this is showing just the AFC first, and then we'll move on to the NFC so we can sort of see the backfield split within a specific team. So an easy way to look at this chart, if you're looking at sort of the different colored shaded regions, in the far right corner there, you see Joe Mixon all alone in the 20 plus expected fantasy points region. Then in the sort of light blue region, you have 15 to 20 expected fantasy points and so on. So looking at those different colored bands, you can sort of see where different players are stacking up in terms of their expected fantasy point workload. And then the size of the bubbles shows how efficient they've been, aka fantasy points over expected. So for reference on this chart, if you see Damian Harris in the middle there, he is basically right at 0 expected fantasy points. So running backs that have a larger bubble than that means they're outperforming their workload. Running backs who have a smaller bubble than that are underperforming their workload.
And just to and I think you might have misspoke there. Just to clarify, the size of the bubble represents fantasy points over expectation. So it's how much do they score over their expected points from their workload.
That's right. Yeah, that's what I meant to say. May have misspoke. So, for example, let's dive into this chart. I think the thing that stands out the most in this chart to me is Joe Mixon. It's sort of, you can take this one of two ways, right? One, like the positive spin is that he has this insane workload. He's smashing everybody else in terms of expected points. Nobody, even in the NFC, is really close to him. He's getting around, I believe, 25 expected fantasy points per game, something in that range. That said, he's also been by far the least efficient running back in terms of fantasy points over expected. He's far underperforming that workload. So on the positive side, you could say, hey, he's due for some positive regression. He's getting this massive workload. On the negative side, you could say maybe the Bengals are watching the tape and seeing that, maybe Samaje Perine or Chris Evans can get them some more juice on receiving situations or whatever it may be. He's just extremely inefficient. So, Drico, how are you approaching the Joe Mixon situation? Because I think, especially in the Bessel Resurrection, he's a key sort of decision point given that workload at an ADP of around.
So I think that Joe Mixon is actually a great point to debut our new running back chart. Because this is the chart that, if you remember, we showed Ben Gretsch on our consultation call on Wednesday evening, and he was like, "Oh, well, here's another way to look at it that will put it in context." And as you can see, that so Joe Mixon is far and away the leader in expected points, but there you see he's not the leader in snap share. He's high up there, but the biggest contributing factor to that expected points is the fact that he is relatively high, but the Bengals have just ran so many plays that it's kind of like inflating that there. And
that's a good point.
I guess probably part of the reason that they ran so many plays is because they have been so inefficient. So if you did get more efficiency, then that would probably push the expected workload down, just because they would run less plays. But one of the reasons I guess I wanted you to selfishly I wanted you to pull up this chart because I look at it and I think myself, there's no way that Saquon Barkley is not the 101. Like, I think it's clear as day. He's more or less the only player that is getting a high expected point total, is playing well with it, and he's leading the NFL in running backs percentage of snap share. He's a guy who's right up there. Like, he's well ahead of even Jonathan Taylor in that kind of bell cow role, and he's outperforming it.
Yeah, I'm with you there. And let me respond to that point in a second. But first, let me just orient. I know this is a new chart, so let me quickly talk through what we're showing here on this chart. So we wanted to look at how each running back's role breaks down as it's a percent of their team's total plays. So, for example, for Saquon Barkley, there you can see he has the highest, like, of his team's total plays. He has a higher percent of rush attempts and routes on those plays than any other running back in the NFL. So that's sort of how you read this chart. That light green section is percent of team plays that he's running a route. The dark green is percent of team plays that he has a rush attempt. So those are like the snaps that we want our running backs to have. We want them to be rushing the ball. We want them to be running routes. So that's sort of an interesting way to look at which running backs are the bell cows versus which running backs are more just sort of situational players. And on this chart here, you can see that Saquon, Fournette, McCaffrey, Taylor, Mixon, Cook, those are the guys you sort of expect to be workhorse backs. And, we can talk about other sort of more surprises there. But back to the Barkley point, I am with you there that I'd have a hard time clicking another running back over him. I think CMC and Taylor for me are still in the discussion, and maybe I don't think it's quite as clear cut as you do. I think it's interesting with all three of those guys, right, that none of their offenses really look good, right? Like, the Panthers look the worst, right? But I'm not excited about the Giants and the Colts either. So I don't know. The Giants stuff, it spooks me just with, they could start to have a couple games where they look like the Panthers have looked for the last couple of weeks, and all of a sudden Saquon's efficiency doesn't look as good. So I think there's some regression to the mean between those guys, and I wouldn't fault anyone for still going with McCaffrey or Barkley. Sorry, McCaffrey or Taylor over Barkley. But I'm with you that it's no longer like crazy to say Barkley should be the first running back taken. So yeah, let's get to some questions from the chat. The Achiever says, is asking, did Saquon just fall off the top of the EP graph? Just to be clear, so this chart here is just showing the AFC, and then this is showing the NFC. The reason I split it like that is just so you can clearly see the backfield breakdown on a team. Like if you wanted to look at David Montgomery versus Khalil Herbert, you could see that on the same graph. So no, Barkley is still very high up in expected points compared to the other running backs. Yeah. So Drico, anything on the AFC or NFC you wanted to hit on? Perhaps like a situation.
So
yeah.
One thing that I do think is very interesting, we don't have it in the chart, but that Breece Hall flipped Michael Carter in snaps last week. So he is now the starter, or I guess I prefer to play him as the starter, and his ADP is still at 59.3. So that's a situation where you've got somebody who is an extremely talented rusher. He looks so good rushing. He gets targets. He delivers with the targets, and you're getting a market that isn't really caught up to that to the new reality of him having flipped Carter in snaps.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Yeah, you can sort of see it on this chart. If you look at the left-hand side, you see both Carter and Hall. Their usage is interesting, right? Because neither of them is really getting much rushing expected fantasy points, and they're both getting a big chunk of receiving. And I think the big thing with the Jets we saw this week is that week 2 Ty Johnson role disappeared in week 3, which I think is great for both Hall and Carter. I was starting to get worried about that potential 3-way split. But they introduced Johnson in week 2 and removed him from the game plan in week 3, essentially. So I think that will stick. I don't see any reason why Ty Johnson needs to be out there when you have those two talented backs. But yeah, it makes me more excited about both, but especially about Hall.
I think the point about the rushing expected points, the reason that it's been receiving is just because they've been chasing games.
Yeah.
And if you got a situation where they were to be leading games, they're probably big. The backs are probably a big part of why they would be leading games, and then you would probably see a lot more rushing. Uh, in,
Yeah.
in a leading scenario. Not that we expect that to happen terribly often, but
Yeah.
I do
No,
think it's like an important.
yeah. No, that's important context. And it's also important context of the Jets. I don't have the numbers up right now, but the Jets have been running an insane amount of plays. Like Joe
Yeah,
Flacco has been throwing the ball like 60 times a game in some games. So it's been a little insane just how the Jets offense has worked out. But I don't really see that. I think they've reached an extreme in weeks 1 to 3, but I do expect them to be trailing in most games throughout the rest of the year. So I think this high receiving usage for for Hall, is relatively sticky. I don't expect necessarily 10 plus expected fantasy points a game, but I think he could be close to that throughout the season. Another thing I wanted to bring up here on the running back side was the Miami backfield. I think that's a weird, interesting one to discuss. You see in this yellow section here, in the 5 to 10 expected fantasy point range, we both have Mostert and Edmonds, and there's no really clear like one's the receiving down back, one's the rushing, the rushing back. They're both sort of seeing a little bit of each. Edmonds is seeing a little bit more in terms of usage. I think that's kind of driven by a couple goal line touches that he has over Mostert. But I've kind of throwing up my hands at this one. Their snaps are pretty evenly split. Is it just that we don't expect Miami to funnel a lot of points to these backs when they have such explosive pass catchers, or do you have any read on why Miami has such a low expected points for these two backs?
So I do remember that Miami ran the fewest plays of any offense in the NFL last week, and the what you call it, that is a big part of expected points is just running plays.
Yeah, that's true.
So obviously they had this pass rate over expectation. They have this huge, like 60% cumulative target share for Tyreek and Waddle, and so it is the case that there's not going to be a lot of points, or expected points left over from that, but I do think that when you're talking about two cheaper backs in an offense that we're now talking about potentially being one of the best in the NFL, that seems like a good target to me.
Yeah, I'm with you there. That's kind of where I was going with that. That I think it's Edmonds at ADP 103, Mostert at 140 in the resurrection, and I think it's just been sort of some weird game script stuff that's gone on. I expect Miami to be a good team that's going to be leading in some games, and eventually you're going to see games where they funnel some rushing to these backs. And I think Edmonds also is a capable receiver. He hasn't really shown that so far, but we've seen how teams adjust to explosive passing attacks in the past, implement a lot of cover two, and try to take that away from teams. I don't know if you can take away Tyreek and Waddle, but teams might try in a way that eventually funnels some of the receiving workload to Edmonds and Mostert. So
eventually, a defense has to go, okay, this is one of the scariest offenses in the NFL. They're trying to these two guys. We have to make sure that they try to beat us with somebody else, beat us with anybody else but these two guys. And the backs could be a big part of that. Somebody else that kind of forces a defense to be a bit more honest.
Yeah, I agree with that. Okay, a couple. Let's move on to the NFC chart, which we haven't spent a lot of time on yet. So again, here just the same chart, but for the NFC. And I think the first thing that people are going to be interested in this week is this Jabal Williams stuff with DeAndre Swift being banged up and potentially missing some weeks. I would be confidently calling Jamal Williams an RB1 for any week that Swift is missing. And maybe that's not even that hot of a take. He's probably already performed at that, even with Swift playing a lot of snaps. But Williams' rushing workload is quite strong. The offense looks good. And I think he's due to take Swift's, he's not as good a receiver as Swift at all, but he's due to take some of those dump off targets if Swift were to miss time. So we already see him here sort of close to the likes of Fournette and McCaffrey in terms of expected points. And I would be, I think if I haven't looked ahead at DFS prices or whatever, but if he's sort of a chalky running back due to a Swift injury, I'd be inclined to say that Jamal Williams is good chalk based on his performance and workload so far.
So yeah, I definitely appreciate the point about the utilization is going. It's going to be a great utilization profile, because the offense has been explosive. He has been getting the goal line carries. They do target the backs. He can pass catch. Mm-hmm. My one concern with Jamal would be that with Swift's absence is that one of the reasons that the offense has been so explosive is because of the Andre Swift. Mm-hmm. And my only concern would be that, okay, so when you take away one of the best players on the offense and the quarterback is Jared Goff, will those kind of goal line carries continue? And he's got a lot of goal line carries. Is that a situation where you're going to get a lot of regression to lower goal line looks, especially with Swift out? But
yeah, that's a good point. I mean, we have seen like Swift rips off a 50-yard run, gets the ball down to the 1-yard line, and Williams punches it in. But if Swift isn't there in the first place to do that, right, Williams can't capitalize. So I do see your point that the overall efficiency of the offense will go down for sure. I think, yeah, we've hit on this. Maybe we don't need to spend a ton of time. Again, Pollard shows up pretty similar to Zeke here. Zeke's getting almost no receiving usage, even though he's playing a lot of snaps, whereas Pollard is seeing a lot of targets while he's on the field. So that sort of explains that. Again, with Pollard, we see him in games ripping off these huge plays. He can still have a spike week even when Zeke plays, but for him to really reach his upside, we're going to need to see a Zeke injury or some miraculous benching of Zeke that seems pretty unprecedented. So they're both just kind of limiting each other in a way. Or I would say like Zeke is limiting Pollard. I don't think Pollard is limiting Zeke because I'm not sure Zeke could even do much with a full workload at this point in his career. But I think it's at least exciting that Pollard is still showing up at around 10 expected fantasy points, even with Zeke there. I think it is sort of reflecting a big potential ceiling if Zeke were to go down. But that's my Pollard rant for the week. Drico, anything else on the NFC you want to touch on?
So I did have a question. So we do have that other running back chart, but I guess it's at the end of the slides. In my head, and I guess we didn't communicate a lot, but in my head, we were going to do the running backs all at the same time.
Yep.
Oh, okay. Thank you. So one point that I thought was interesting is that the Rashad Penny routes and rush attempts share is relatively high. It's right around. It's actually right around Derrick Henry, Zeke, Aaron Jones, Kamara, and it's interesting that is so high that he's got this high share. But then you look at the expected points, and it's only 22 expected points in 3 games, and it kind of really does demonstrate how brutal an offense Seattle is for the running backs. That somebody can be basically a it's definitely a starter, borderline kind of like workhorse in terms of share, and still get like next to nothing in expected points, and for a back in the offense to really produce, they have to be so efficient to really juice up those points. And I guess it is interesting that Penny, he did have that monster yard carry last year. Kenneth Walker, really explosive college production efficiency. And I guess it's interesting. Do you still? I'm asking myself, do I still want to make that bet at pick 130, or for Penny, or 133 for Walker? And I do think it's still interesting there, but obviously seeing that 22 is a good punch.
Yeah, that's tough. And I think an interesting, if you could see on this chart, like I don't know what the data point is. Maybe it's team snaps, or maybe it's like total team expected fantasy points or something. But that's what this chart is like, is hiding a bit, right? Is just that the team situation for Seattle is so bad. It makes no sense that Penny, he's sort of in the same range of these guys we're excited about in terms of routes and rush attempts. Like Eckler, Najee, Derrick Henry, Zeke, like these are all names. If you're telling me, oh, Penny's around those guys in terms of workload, I'm like, wow, that was a smash at pick 100 or whatever. But God, that they're playing just so slow. Geno hasn't even been bad. That's not really what it is. I don't think. I just think it's just that they're running so few plays.
Right.
That's really dragging down Penny. But if I were to take a stance on, you said his ADP is 130 in the resurrection, I am still pretty confidently buying at that price. Like he's showing up based on this chart as sort of a top 15 running back in terms of workload. Even on a bad team, I think it's hard to see how that fails at pick 130. It's not hard to see how it fails. Like they're fucking Seattle, but,
right?
Like,
but the same reality was true last year when he won Liam the BBM 2. They had Geno Smith as quarterback. They had the issue when they were not getting as many plays as you'd want, but he can play so good that he's so efficient that he kind of like canceled out the other stuff.
Yeah, I agree. So moving on from Penny, another interesting thing on this chart that I wanted to point out, I don't think it has to be a long discussion, but Fournette and McCaffrey, we touched about them a bit. I think they're both, I would take a pulse check on their managers in your fantasy leagues if you're in a league with active trading, because they're still showing up as massive workhorses here in the same category as Barkley and Taylor. And I think there are better days ahead for both those offenses. Obviously, with Tampa, you can see how there's better days ahead once Brady's pass catchers return. With Carolina, it's almost like they can't be worse. So, if there's an owner who's freaking about McCaffrey, maybe he's also thinking about how he's been injured the past couple of years. I'm still excited about McCaffrey. Now, am I happy I took him at 101? No, but if someone is valuing him as like, a late first or second round pick, I think I'm doing a quick sort of pulse check there on that owner. Drico, anything else here on the running back side, or should we move on to the wide receivers?
So just a comment, his ADP is 9.1. Sorry, no, that's the wrong competition. His ADP is 6 in the resurrection, so you I guess any slide there and you're scooping.
Yeah.
In the resurrection, I expect you to have 50% CMC this week. With
I think at that, it's a good point. At that price, that's not standing out as a massive value to me. I think these resurrection drafters are sharp. I think this is maybe more of a comment for like folks in leagues where I think people are pretty down on McCaffrey right now. And at ADP of 6 seems just like fair to me,
right,
in the resurrection. What the real value I think is Fournette at 30. I mean, it's gross, right? He doesn't look great out there. He's getting a lot of touches. It's been inefficient. Tampa Bay's offense looks bad, but man, I'm not giving up on Brady on that offense once they get Julio, Evans, Godwin back. I think they're going to be all right. I guess we do have this other running back chart. So here we have sort of more situational running backs. I don't think we have to spend a ton of time here, Drico, unless something stood out. I think the big thing for me is just CEH is so far and away. I think the perception of him right now is way better than his actual role. He's here sort of at only around 40% of Kansas City snaps. Is he getting a route or a rush attempt? He's a rotational player. They're rotating McKinnon. They're rotating Pacheco a little bit. He's been really efficient, and the offense will continue to be good. But he's not going to keep up the same touchdown efficiency. I don't think.
I'd love to do a man on the street show. Did you know Clyde Edwards-Helaire is only getting 40% of the snaps for the Chiefs?
Yeah. I think that's why these charts are interesting, right? Because I wouldn't have thought that.
Right.
But it really shows,
we got a comment in from Chung about Khalil Herbert. I think Sean Siegel, he wasn't on the 0 RB list, but he'd called him a top 5 running back for the rest of the year. And I think it's probably a good example of where you really do need to be reactive to the information that you're giving, where Khalil Herbert kind of looks so good that when we're looking at this kind of year's crop of running backs, and everybody, even the best are only getting 85 kind of percent snap shares, and that's the best. And then you go down a little bit, and Dalvin Cook is right around 60%. And so even these guys who project to be in timeshares type committees, if they can be if they can be extremely efficient, that they can really push any running back. So I don't know if I'm not gonna ever disagree with Sean. I guess you have to be so reactive to we've got this new environment. We've seen a young player show an awful lot of juice, and is obviously going to push for a lot of playing time. And I guess that would be kind of my reaction to that question.
Yeah, I think I largely agree with that. I need to look more into the Montgomery injury. I think that we'll get more news there about
it's day to day.
Yeah. Okay.
I think he got 150 yards on something I think it was 18 carries or 20 carries or something like that. So he just he was the engine of the offense, and it's okay, well, if this guy basically won you the game from an offensive standpoint, are you what are you gonna do? You're gonna play Montgomery over him? Probably it's still gonna be ahead, but it's not okay, you're not gonna leave that guy on the bench either.
No, I think his role will grow. Man, though, this happened last year, right? When Montgomery went down and Herbert flashed a ton, and then everyone's like, "Oh, Herbert's gonna have a role," and they threw him right back down on the bench once Montgomery went
That
back,
is true, but I believe that was a different coaching staff, so maybe this year is different.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I'm excited about Herbert. I just have to throw the wet towel on it a little bit. We did get one question in the Discord from Hassan on the Bills usage, and let me just start. Apologies, but go back to this chart here because I think we can see it more clearly. It's probably worth pointing out how far ahead Singletary is of James Cook and Zach Moss right now. But if I were to take an RB2 in Buffalo right now, I think it is Cook over Moss for a couple reasons. One, I don't have the numbers ahead of me, but his snaps are trending up. Obviously, he had that disaster week 1 with the fumble on his first touch. He saw a little bit more action in week 2, I think largely in garbage time. But then last week, you saw, and it could have been a product of just the insane number of plays the Bills ran, but I saw him playing a decent bit down the stretch. I think also lined up out wide or in the slot as a wide receiver when they're just rotating snaps there for a bunch of guys. So I think it is interesting they're getting him on the field a little bit more in those situations. And also just the fact that he's a rookie. They spent a second-round pick on him. We've seen this coaching staff, relegate Zach Moss to healthy scratches in years past. So I think this Moss over Cook stuff is not going to last long. And I'm starting to get a little bit more excited about James Cook with his ADP quite low in the resurrection compared to his preseason ADP. He's going out pick 165 right now. Man, just as a contingency play off Singletary, I think that's pretty exciting on a really high-powered offense. I am going to have a ton of James Cook at that price. Any thoughts on the Bills' backfield, Drico?
No, I think you nailed it.
Yeah.
The other point is that the resurrection is obviously so much more in favor of rookies because you push the timeline down the road. Doesn't start till week 6. So these weeks where he's not really playing don't matter for scoring. And you can probably take another 2 weeks. And if he's playing a lot by week 9, like you're cooking with gas there.
Yep, for sure. On the wide receivers, so looking at this chart here, again, we're looking here at fantasy points versus weighted targets per route run, which is sort of a measure of wide receiver earned opportunity. It's targets per route run adjusted for air yards. So again, a bomb 50 yards down the field is worth more than a screen pass in this metric. So looking at this chart, we have sort of 4 quadrants. In the top right, we have strong performers. So those are guys who are earning a strong opportunity and have performed well in terms of fantasy points per game. In the bottom right, we have guys who have earned a strong opportunity but have not flashed a high fantasy ceiling yet. We're calling them buy lows. And then the top left, we have guys who are not earning a significant opportunity but have earned a lot of fantasy points. So those we're designating as sell highs. Again, this is a bit, I don't want to be too conclusive with sell high versus buy low. Guys who flash efficiency on limited targets can earn bigger roles, and guys who are earning a lot of targets and not doing anything can be relegated. So again, these are not like, you have to evaluate the individual player situation before determining buy low versus sell high, but it's sort of a general framework for how we think about it. And then finally, in the far bottom left here, we have guys we're calling cardio specialists. They're running a ton of routes, but they're not earning any opportunity, and they're not also earning any fantasy points. So this chart here, these are the guys that are running more than 90% of their team routes. They're the almost every snap guys for their teams, the likes of Cooper Kupp, Deontay Johnson, CeeDee Lamb, those types of guys. Drico, I'll kick it to you. Anything that stand out for you amongst these full-time wide receivers?
So to start out, I want to kind of give an example of how I've used this chart the last 2 weeks in both DFS and in underdog kind of DFS. So I think it's really useful to use this chart to look at who are the more like kind of unlooked at or like under the radar guys who are actually playing 100% of their team snaps. And obviously you have to use some kind of discretion. But for example, Matt Collins was on this chart the last 2 weeks in a row. He was in the cardio specialist section, but he was also kind of like now he was how do I call it? Not unheralded. Like he was complete chalk in DFS.
Yeah.
But the fact that he does run such a high percentage of his team's routes means that it makes him in play for those weeks where he doesn't get the dominant target share, but he just gets a bit of point variance. The same with Devonta Smith. Devonta Smith was actually in the cardio specialist section the last 2 weeks in a row in this chart, and obviously we've seen exactly just how talented Devonta Smith is. So I kind of like And this is maybe it's a bit unusual. I kind of like looking at the non-strong performing parts. I'm like, okay, who's somebody who's running a lot of routes, is going cheap right now, and I think can really smash in future weeks. And I look at this and I see that Elijah Moore is in the cardio specialists, and we have it as labeled cardio specialist question mark for a reason. Um, and I think that Elijah Moore is super interesting there because we know he's a really, really good wide receiver. It hasn't worked out for him so far, but he is somebody that I'm very interested in playing. That like I said, full-time starter. Think he could be kind of like a special NFL talent. And just because we haven't seen it through 3 weeks doesn't mean that it's not going to be a strong season for him.
Yeah, I think you identified exactly that. That's exactly what I was thinking. I was looking at this chart and looking at the cardio specialists. I thought, amongst that group, it's a bunch of guys who are underperforming. Obviously, that's why they're there. But Elijah Moore, compared to all those other guys, doesn't have the same sort of negative team expectations or negative career trajectory expectations, aka Allen Robinson and Adam Thielen sort of have that going for them. So I think the Jets have shown they can be a sort of high volume passing team with a lot of points going to the wide receivers. And I think it's a little bit of noise that Garrett Wilson is hitting these huge weeks and Elijah Moore is not. Just as we saw in the first 2 weeks, you brought up the Devonta Smith example. I think that's a great one. The him versus AJ Brown. Everyone's saying, oh, Devonta, he's getting totally boxed out by AJ Brown. He's going to have a terrible year, blah, blah, blah. He puts up a massive week that could have been even more massive, right, if the Eagles didn't get so far ahead in that one. So I'm with you on Elijah Moore. I think the other interesting name there or I guess interesting team there that I want to talk about is the Steelers. You see Deontay in the buy low section. You see both Pickens and Claypool in the cardio specialist section. So like we talked about in the quarterbacks, Trubisky is really just bringing those guys down. And I do think there's either going to be a week where Trubisky gets benched for Pickett and Pickett flashes some of that preseason hype that we saw and sort of elevates those guys, or they're just going to run good on efficiency in a given game, even with Trubisky. So as far as DFS throws go, or DFS start throws go, I'm pretty happy with either Claypool or Pickens, or sort of a higher price guy that the market might be underrating right now. I'm pretty excited about Deontay Johnson. They're running a ton of routes in this offense, and eventually one of these guys is going to spike for a big week, I think.
And I think the other thing as well is that the defense is so bad that they're probably going to be trailing. Once they play kind of better offenses than the Browns, they're probably going to be trailing a lot of games.
Yeah, I agree. Gabe Davis is another one that I think I don't have the same excitement for him as Elijah Moore because I don't think the talent is quite there. That said, the offensive situation is better, and I think he's been playing banged up, especially last week. So I'm not overreacting too much to low target numbers he's had. He's clearly a full-time player in this offense, and once he gets healthy, I think he's going to have a massive week at some point. So he's another guy that to your point, I think especially on this 90% routes run chart in this cardio specialist section, you can really identify some under-owned guys in DFS right. Once you factor in the price. So he's another guy that if ownership is low, I'm excited about, but I have to look more into that.
So I had a guy penciled here. Christian Kirk is in the strong performer. So he's running 90 to 95% of routes. He's dominating targets. He's scoring over 20 points a game. We talked about how much we love Trevor Lawrence. But talking about kind of price adjusted, he's going in the third round. What do you think of that? Do you think that he should be? Let me pull up the guys who's going around. Do you think that he should be going around T. Higgins, ahead of Mike Williams, ahead of Gabe Davis, ahead of Cortland Sutton? DeAndre Hopkins, Drake London.
Yeah. Man, I think that's the right range for him. I think so. I'm just looking at it. I think CD should be going ahead of him. I've been sort of famous for slandering CD, but almost more in a joking way. I still think CD is a better talent there. But after that, I don't know. I'm not taking him ahead of Higgins, but I think I'm taking him ahead of Mike Williams, Gabe Davis, Cortland Sutton, maybe Drake London. I think that's close. So maybe a little bit of a lukewarm take there, but I think he's basically in the right range. Maybe you could make the case for one or two guys going ahead of him. But I'm just buying into this Jacksonville offense, and I'm also buying into the fact that he was just misused in Arizona, and Jacksonville identified, him as a top wide receiver on the market, and they're using him as that, and he's performing as that. So at some point, I think we have to say that, he's a new player than he was in Arizona, and I kind of have a hard time seeing how this fails. I think it is a bit scary just because we never really saw this in Arizona, but I think I'm okay largely with that price. Do you have a different take there, Drico?
I'm a little bit different.
Okay.
So I agree for the most part. My one concern is that we are using a 3-game sample size of Trevor Lawrence being this great all-time prospect in the NFL. And I know I said on the quarterback section, oh, hey, I want to buy that. But probably more than most fantasy players, I'm really responsive to price. And at pick 100 or whatever his actual ADP in a draft is right now, like I'm making that bet that he's he is the generational prospect. And when it puts Christian Kirk in third round, that's when I start to think about alternative scenarios of oh, maybe we've just seen a great 3-game stretch and week 4 through 7 are going to be much worse. And I had this penciled in for the next chart, but maybe it's it is this chart. Maybe a better way to play it is, or better way to buy the Jaguars offense is Zay Jones, who is where have I got him?
He's earning a similar opportunity in terms of weighted per. I don't know if that's where you're going with that, but he's earning a similar opportunity.
Similar opportunity, and his price is a pick 145.
Yeah,
and so you've got an over 100 ADP difference. And I guess if you're asking me, who do I think is better, Christian Kirk or Zay Jones? It's Christian Kirk. But for a way to make a cheap bet on the cheapest way I can make the bet on the Jaguars being this great offense juggernaut led by Trevor Lawrence, I think that would be the way that I would want to do it.
That's fair. And yeah, if you're asking me, would I rather price adjusted have the Zay Jones stack or even the ETN stack? I think ETN's going to pick 84 and he can have some spikes in the receiving game there. I'm with you. I would rather have Lawrence stacked with those guys, just price adjusted. Even Marvin Jones, it's a little grosser there, but he is also earning a decent opportunity in that offense. And we've seen him have big touchdown guys. He's sort of a big-bodied contested catch guy that can make plays in the red zone. So, those cheap Jag stacks, I think that if the prices stay as they are, which I'm praying for, I'm not sure they will, the cheap Jag stacks are I think, an incredible way to attack the best ball resurrection right now. You can get Lawrence, Zay Jones, ETN quite late in drafts and just bank on the Jaguars continuing to be good and just print money there. So I think that's a good point, Drico. I'll capitulate there. I still think I don't want to have zero Kirk at his price because I don't think the wide receivers around him, outside of a few guys that I mentioned, are smashes above him.
Right.
But I don't want to be overexposed to him at that price. I guess
I kind of set you up there a little bit as well. I set you up, and then I fucking.
You had me. I didn't have the Zay Jones ADP memorized yet.
It's
but
the punches you
there.
don't see coming that get you.
Yeah. Okay, so we've moved on to this next chart, just for people following along, where we're now wide receivers that ran 70 to 90% of their team's routes. So again, these are sort of the close to full-time players, but guys for whatever reason are not seeing a full complement of snaps, whether it's because they're slot only, whether because they get subbed out, whether because they were maybe injured in the game and left early, those type of guys. Drico, anything here on the sort of rotational wide receivers?
Yeah. So the kind of border, I think this is a borderline starter. I think the first thing that kind of
borderline starter is a better way for these. It's not rotational. I'd say borderline starter.
Popped to me was that so you heard it first here in stat chasing. Drake London over DJ Moore. The market has reacted. Drake London goes ahead of DJ Moore in drafts, as it should be. We saw another week where even with Kyle Pitts getting the 40%, I think it was either target share or targets per route run, Drake London still held on to a 30% targets per route run. He's still at 80% weighted targets per route run, and he's clearly, I guess, one of the best picks in fantasy football right now.
Yeah, I can't argue with that. I'm going to refuse to capitulate on my Pollard over London stance because I still have the out of
Oh, wow. You're still on Pollard over London?
I'm not capitulating yet because once Zeke gets hurt, I'm going to...
Can we put money on this?
Okay. If I'm being honest and you're saying in a vacuum, who do I want, London versus Pollard? It's not even close. I think there is a debate with how we structured our team that the upside of Pollard represent, but let's not talk about our fantasy.
Right?
No one cares about that.
Let's
talk about that.
Actionable advice.
Yeah. Let's not talk about that. But okay, yeah. On this chart, I totally agree. London is seeing ridiculous opportunity. I also think there's upside, not necessarily in terms of routes run. He's seeing a lot of routes that could go up a little bit. I think the upside is more so the Falcons could be forced into game scripts where they have to throw a little bit more. They played some pretty bad offenses the first couple weeks of the year. I believe New Orleans week 1, I'm blanking on week 2, but Seattle in week 3. And they've actually had leads in a lot of those games. I know in week 1 they were up on New Orleans by quite a bit, and we're running a bunch. So I think you've seen games where Mariota has 20, 25 pass attempts. If that ever spikes in a given week, you could really see some massive weeks for London and also Pitts. So I am very, very excited about Drake London, and I think his ADP is fully justified in the resurrection, which I think is 4th round in the 40s somewhere.
Makes sense for sure. So we did get a question in from Hassan about Tyler Boyd. I think it was something about is he here to stay? And you can see here on the chart that Tyler Boyd is not a cardio specialist, but that's in weeks 1 through 3. That's kind of like the area that he lands in. Mm-hmm. And to me, that's kind of evidence that as long as T. Higgins and Jamar Chase are healthy and on the field, he is going to be a kind of distant third target. But he also proved in the game against the Jets and numerous times last year too that this is not just a boring low upside slot guy. He's a legit playmaker. He's a very good NFL wide receiver who makes very good plays, and I guess he's really kind of like I guess the way I would put it is if you drafted a kind of ship chasing Rotoviz centric team, you're probably not going to want to start him. But in best ball, while you wait, or even if there is no absences for T or Chase, he's going to have the type of games where he just makes such a big play that he does score strong points. And if the contingent value, if one of them were to miss time, is huge. That's kind of how I would see Tyler Boyd, especially at pick 115, which is pretty close to his offseason ADP.
Yeah. Yep, I'm with you there. I think the contingent value. There's not many wide receivers, or maybe that's not the right way to put it, but I think Tyler Boyd has some of the highest contingent value of any wide receiver. We did get a question in the chat or in the Discord about Rashad Bateman. I think some people are a bit spooked on Bateman. Now my Bateman take, I don't have a good explanation for why he's only earning 70 to 80% of the routes. What I will say about that number is I think it's extremely unlikely that goes down. I think there's really only upside for that to go up. Number two, Lamar is breaking fantasy right now. And while that has largely resulted in massive games for Mark Andrews instead of Bateman, I think Bateman has flashed a lot while he's been on the field that we're going to see some big games for Bateman coming up. Like the worry with Bateman is the volume in Baltimore could be low in games where they get ahead, but they're actually throwing quite a bit when they have to, or at least Lamar is dropping back. He's sometimes scrambling, which is skewing those numbers a bit. But I'm still excited about Bateman. He's a bit of a low floor play that can feel a little bit uncomfortable and managed, but I'm just buying that this Baltimore offense is gonna go through Lamar and the passing game and gonna score quite a bit of touchdown. They're gonna continue to outperform touchdown expectations just with how unstoppable Lamar looks. So I'm still pretty excited about Bateman, and especially where I have him as my wide receiver 3 or 4. I'm still putting him in and sort of riding the highs and lows with Bateman. Drico, anything to add there, or like any explanation for why he's not seeing a full workload? I don't really have an answer there.
I think I heard something that it was something to do with his blocking or something like that.
Okay.
That he's not a great blocker, so that's why his kind of snaps are lower.
That checks out.
But he's definitely like a. I hate to use this term with any wide receiver because they all have volatile profiles, but he is somebody who he's either going to make a huge play or is not going to have a great fantasy day. Like he needs a big plays to score points.
Yeah.
Which
yeah,
it's not comfortable. But I think I'd still his ADP he goes just behind Michael Thomas and just in front of Amari Cooper, and I'm happily taking him over those guys. So
yeah, I'm with you there. Yeah, it's like it's one of those things where I think like a few years ago I'd be like, oh, sell Rashad Bateman. He's making it based off big plays, but I think this is a situation in Baltimore where I expect the big plays to continue and I expect the touchdowns to continue. So even though it's low volume, man, when you see Rashad Bateman play, when he gets the ball in his hands, he's kind of a menace right now. He's ripping off some huge yak plays.
The touchdown against Miami was like electric.
Yeah, and even last week, very quiet game, but he had one big 40-yard play against New England where he was just kind of toying with guys in the open field and ripped off sort of a huge yak play there. So I just think he's really good. So I still
that's a great reason to drop the player, right?
Yeah. Yep.
We did get a question about Dortch, and to me he pretty easy, really easy sell high. Like so he has scored points, but not really. He's in our kind of sell high quadrant, so he hasn't really kind of drawn the targets to justify the points. And then once DeAndre Hopkins comes back, like once Rondale Moore comes, Rondale for Chris, our friend Chris G, come back, it's really hard to see him still being a key part of their offense, I think.
Yeah, I agree with that. We'll see on this Rondale Moore injury news. I think part of the Dortch stuff here is, as sort of you see with Samuel, it's not necessarily he's not earning a lot of targets. I think his target rate is okay. It's very low ADOT targets. And I think Samuel is a good, low value targets. And I don't think, whereas Samuel has the athletic chops and also a bit of rushing usage to overcome a low ADOT role, I don't think Dortch does. He's not that guy. Finishing up the wide receivers here, I want to make sure we have enough time to get to tight ends. I think the backup tight
Rushing
ends.
us through the receivers to get the backup tight ends.
Yeah, we got to talk about Noah Gray for 10 minutes. That's on the premium version of Stat Chasing. This chart here, I think again, these charts, we see a lot of Packers wide receivers, and I think people are excited about Dubs. And I think we should be pretty excited about Dubs. He's not flashing in a way that Burks, Wilson, Olave, some of these guys that we're really excited about are, but it may be okay given the offensive environment and the fact that we could expect him to get better as the season goes on. I think I made this point last week, so I don't think we need to spend a ton of time on it, but I'm going with Watson and Dubs as the Packers wide receivers go. I'm kind of fading all the rest of the guys. And I think you have to give Dubs the edge over Watson just on how he's played so far. But I still think, Watson has a shot to come out of this wide receiver room as the guy you want down the stretch, just based on the opportunity each of them have earned so far on limited snaps. But Dubs is clearly ahead now and seems to be trending in the right direction compared to Watson.
Yeah, I think as well, the other thing is that the other receivers are so bad.
Yeah.
And Dobbs, he has the really strong college profile. He's already kind of like not proven, but he's given us evidence that he is a good NFL player. That feels like, to me, that feels like a smash pick at ADP 114. That does feel like one of those picks where you just need to smash it every time.
Yep. I am totally with you there. Let's move on to the tight ends to wrap things up. This chart here, same we've showed the last couple of weeks. We're looking at percent of team dropbacks and what these tight ends are doing on those dropbacks, whether they're on the field at all. And if they're on the field, are they running pass routes or are they pass blocking? I just want to hammer home the point. Before we start, we did change up the data rows a little bit here so you can see targets per route run and ADOT. Pat Crane was making the interesting point that ADOT he thinks is something that matters a lot for tight ends. It kind of reflects, are they being used as an actual wide receiver and getting down the field targets, or are they sort of just like a dump off guy? They're chipping a defensive end and then like rolling into the flat and getting a gross little 3-yard dump off. So that really pops here on this chart, which was thanks to Pat for suggesting that. But you see Mark Andrews, Travis Kelce, Kyle Pitts, Darren Waller. Those are the guys that are spiking in terms of ADOT on this chart, and those are the fantasy tight ends we want. So that's an interesting data point to look at. But yeah, I was gonna mention before I could get off to you, Drico, that Mark Andrews is a wide receiver that you can play at tight end in fantasy, and he's dominating targets on one of the best, most efficient offenses in the league. So I would take Mark Andrews. Like, I'm looking at the resurrection ADP right now. He's pick 13. Man, I'm taking him over Kelce easily. I think I'm taking him over Devontae Adams and Josh Allen. I think you should be going closer to where Kelce was going last year, sort of in the pick like 6 to 8 range. I just think he's such a smash in terms of the opportunities earning, and the talent is there. And just compared to Kelce, I mean, he's so much younger. He just looks like he has so much juice when you watch him on the field. So I already had a ton of Andrews when he was going around 18 to 20, and I'm just continuing to scoop more because I think he provides you such a positional edge over the other guys on this list. So that's my Andrew spiel. Drico, anything you wanted to highlight on the tight end usage?
Yeah, I agree with everything you said there about Andrews. I had to think about it a little bit when you said pick 6 to 8. Like, I had to think about it, but when you think about like how well Lamar Jackson has played, how kind of like dire the rest of the tight end pool looks like, the gap between him and everybody else is so large that it's a
positional advantage argument. Yeah.
That's just how it is.
Yeah.
My first reaction when I saw this chart was that Tyler Higbee has to be the worst full-time tight end in the NFL. He is heavily targeted, but they're 3.1 ADOT when I first saw that stat, I was like, did I calculate this wrong? Like, he was my gut check, make sure that I've actually calculated this correctly. And I did. My eyes did not deceive me. It's a 3.1 A dot. Even with a 22% targets per route run, and the high route share, I think at pick 106, you can do worse things at pick 106. But I just think it's a triple condom play where you're like, you can feel comfortable with it, but I really struggle to see Tyler Higbee being a guy who can win you money.
Yeah, I agree. I want to talk about Kittle quickly on this chart.
He was in my notes as well.
Yeah, just the fact that he was like immediately seeing such a high route rate was a good sign. Look, he didn't have a good game. Like the targets per route run 8 out numbers aren't going to look good, but I'm not reading into that on a 1-game sample. I think the bigger data point to take away from week 3 is just that he's getting a full-time role. So I'll have to check his price in the resurrection to
it's 50 something.
50 something. So yeah, I'm still good with Kittle. My priors on Kittle haven't changed. I guess they're even maybe it's slightly up from the beginning of the season, knowing that we have Jimmy G a little bit more stable there than Lance. So I'm totally good with Kittle at his price.
Right. It's not really a surprise for me to see such a high route share for Kittle because it's George Kittle and that's that there has been notes about, oh hey, he pass blocks too much, but he does pass block too much. The fact that he pass blocks at all is too much for me. But he's on the field like almost really close to 100% of the time. So even with his pass blocking, his route run share is always so high, and that if the San Francisco ever passed, he's so live to put up such huge points that he's a big part of my strategy every year.
Yeah. Paul asks in the chat, do you think it's reactionary to use this chart for coin flips on deciding when maybe you'd stack a tight end in DFS? So let me talk about how I would use this chart in DFS. I think this is a good way to identify punt plays in DFS. For example, Tyler Conklin. Not a believer in Tyler Conklin's talent. I don't think the situation's that good with Joe Flacco throwing him the ball, but he's out there all the time. And last week he showed that, look, a tight end who's out there all the time, he can have a big game. David Njoku kind of showed that too, like pretty gross weeks 1 and 2. But if a guy's out there running all the routes, just by pure variance, they can have a big game. So if any of these guys are priced really low or have really low ownership, maybe Dawson Knox is a good example. He's looked really gross the first few weeks. Maybe that's not quite a good example because his route shares is pretty low. Maybe someone like Brait, I imagine he's extremely cheap in DFS. Like these guys that are just gross, but they're out there all the time on on decent offenses that could pass a bit.
It's a good way to identify names that you're not familiar with that are full-time players in their offense and can be kind of contrarian, low-priced leverage or not leverage plays. The tournament plays.
Yeah. I think Brait would be my favorite as a tournament play. I just assume he has it's such a disgusting click. He looks terrible out there. He's not earning targets, but he's running all the routes. They're not really using Kyle Rudolph or any of these other guys, and he could, bank a 2-touchdown, 5-catch game. We've seen him do that with Brady before. So it's low probability, right? But probability relative to the expectation, I think is good.
And another way to use this chart. So let's say you were considering between Dallas Goedert, and this is a really obvious example, Dallas Goedert and Kyle Pitts. You can see, okay, very similar route shares, except Kyle Pitts has a 24% target per route run, and Goddard is 14%. Kyle Pitts, ADOT of 13.2. Now, I expect Dallas Goedert's eventual full season to be higher than 3.1, but it's
Yeah.
still like it's news, it's information that you can use in your decisions. And obviously, in a tournament, you really want to leverage, or you really want to use what's the ownership going to be. So you're not going to play 40% caught pits against one instead of 1% Dallas Goddard, but it is useful information.
Yeah. Last point on this chart, Juwan Johnson, that ADOT is pretty good. We talked about the only guys with plus 10 ADOTs who are running more than 60% of routes: Mark Andrews, Travis Kelce, Kyle Pitts, Darren Waller, and Pat's boy, Juwan Johnson. So just a quick plug for Juwan Johnson. We have 4 minutes to get to the backup tight end chart. Ship Chasing is trying to censor me. They try to prevent this chart from getting out to the
Too
public.
late. We got to end the show.
But backup tight end takes. Drico, I know you have been dying to talk about Tanner Hudson. What do you think his role looks like in week 4?
So yeah, this is all you.
Okay, the one thing I had here, let's end the show. But John, I think for deeper leagues, there's a potential Johnny who flips Hunter Henry. We saw it a little bit last week where Johnny out. I mean, he's been out targeting him consistently, but I think his snaps could go up, and he just looks like the more explosive player, the higher target earner on the field. He's earning 24% targets per route run, whereas Hunter Henry is only earning 6%. So they paid these guys the same amount. I wouldn't be shocked if there's a flippening there. So I'm looking to Johnny in tight end premium. That was my one backup tight end take. Okay, nothing, Drico. Okay,
I guess that it's mildly interesting that Noah Fant is well ahead of Will Dissly. I remember we were worried at the start of the or later in the offseason that Will Dissly would run ahead of Fant. So the fact that Fant is running ahead of him is interesting. The fact that it's sub 60% of routes run is painful if you're drafting him during the offseason, but it gives me a little bit of hope. And pick 212, it makes him an interesting tight end, I think, in the resurrection.
Yep. Final point. I mentioned it last week, but if you're just looking for upside at tight end, you can cross off a ton of these names. I would look to Isaiah Likely, and who's actually not shown on this chart. I think he just misses the chart.
No, he's in the chart. He's the third last name.
Oh, okay. Isaiah Likely is there, but Noah Gray just misses the chart. If I am in a tight end premium deep format and I need upside, I'm taking those two guys because I think they're the two contingent plays at tight end. You can maybe throw Foster Moreau into that category as well, but I'd rather have them. And in the unfortunate incident of a Mark Andrews injury, they're getting you way more upside than holding on to someone like Brevin Jordan or Robert Tonyan or even Mike Gesicki at this point. So that's kind of how I'm tie-breaking decisions there. But anyways, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks, Drico. That was a great discussion. I will be posting these charts on Twitter and in the Ship Chasing Discord. And you can find all of Drico's great work on RotoViz. I know he's been writing a lot about the underdog battle royale formats. Drico, any last words before we wrap up the show?
And no, I think we've said it all, and we hit under our quota of an hour and 30 minutes. So happy with that.
Yep. All right, guys. We will see you next week. Good luck.